Your Honor, I thought the camera would save me. I trashed his place for clout and ran. I get it now.
You know, people often think a courtroom is just a place of dry numbers, rigid statutes, and the sound of a wooden gavel striking a block. But after more than a decade sitting in this chair, watching thousands of faces pass through those doors, I've learned a brutal but necessary truth. The courtroom is sometimes the most elaborately staged theater of all. Here, we don't just seek justice, we seek the truth hidden behind layers of masks. There are those who walk in with dirty hands but clean souls, and there are those who walk in with a perfect, fragile exterior, but inside lies a cold calculation. My job isn't just to apply the law, it's to see right through that performance. That morning started like every other in my career. I arrived at the courthouse while the city was still half asleep. The air in my chambers is always cold and still, a stark contrast to the chaos I'm about to face. I don't drink the clerk's pot coffee. I brew my own black tea, no sugar. The bitterness keeps me sharp, keeps the mind on edge. I flipped through the stack of files on my desk. The morning docket is usually minor infractions, red lights, disorderly conduct, petty disputes. But buried near the bottom of the list was an eviction case. The file read, Harrison versus Jenkins. On paper, the case looked simple enough to be heartbreaking. A single mother, 3 children, no rent paid, for 6 consecutive months. The landlord, an elderly man named Mr. Harrison, had been as patient as a saint, but now he was facing bankruptcy himself, carrying the mortgage debt for a tenant who wasn't paying. However, something in the court officer's notes made me pause. Defendant repeatedly requests postponement due to health reasons. Defendant contacted local press. Defendant posting crying videos on social media. I leaned back in my chair, narrowing my eyes at those words. After years of facing master manipulators, my intuition started ringing alarm bells. There is a vast difference between someone who is truly at a dead end and someone using pity as a weapon. I told myself, today, we're going to see if Miss Jenkins is a victim of circumstance or the director of her own tragedy. Court convened at 9 a.m. The atmosphere in the room today was thick with tension. When my clerk, Christina, called the case Harrison versus Jenkins, I felt an immediate shift in the room. The doors swung open, and Sarah Jenkins walked in. She didn't walk in alone. She had 3 children with her, the oldest about 8, the youngest in her arms. But what caught my eye wasn't the children, it was the way she walked. Her shoulders were hunched, head bowed low, a crumpled handkerchief dabbing incessantly at her eyes. Even though I hadn't seen a single tear fall yet, she wore an old coat, frayed intentionally. I say intentionally because her shoes, though muddy, were brand new, high-end designer sneakers, the kind of thing someone who hasn't paid rent in half a year rarely possesses. She stopped at the podium, her shoulders shaking violently. A whimpering sound was loud enough for the microphone to pick up, broadcasting it across the courtroom. I watched her over the rim of my glasses, remaining silent. I hadn't said a word, hadn't asked a single question, but the show had already begun. On the other side stood Mr. Harrison, the landlord. He looked hunched over, appearing 10 years older than the last time I saw him in the file photos. He clutched his hat in his hands, his eyes full of guilt and exhaustion. He looked at Miss Jenkins as if he were the one committing a crime, not the one having his property taken. I glanced down at the file one last time, then up at Sarah. Her eyes darted furtively toward the media gallery, checking the camera angles, before snapping back to a look of utter misery. Miss Jenkins, I spoke up, my voice cutting through her, whimpering like a blade. Step up to the microphone. We don't have all day for pantomime. She looked up, a flash of genuine shock on her face for a split second, as if she couldn't believe I would break the tragic atmosphere she had worked so hard to build. But very quickly, she recovered that mask, took a deep breath like a drowning woman grasping a lifeline, and began the story that I was certain she had rehearsed in front of a mirror 100 times. Miss Jenkins cleared her throat, her hand trembling as she adjusted the microphone. She didn't look at me. She looked straight into the camera lens of the court TV show, as if that was the jury she really cared about. Your Honor, she began, her voice quavering with a practiced fragility. I never wanted to be in this position. I'm a good mother. I love my babies. But the The world has just been so cruel to me lately. She paused for effect, waiting for a sympathetic murmur that never came. The courtroom remained silent, heavy with the weight of my stare. 6 months ago, she continued, I was diagnosed with a rare condition, fibromyalgia, combined with chronic fatigue syndrome. Some days, I can't even get out of bed to feed my children. I lost my job because of it. And then my car broke down and the medical bills started piling up. She reached into her oversized bag and pulled out a stack of crumpled papers, waving them vaguely in the air. I have proof, Your Honor. I have letters from doctors. I have bills. Mr. Harrison knows this, I told him. I begged him for just a little more time. But he doesn't care about a sick mother and her hungry children. He just wants his money. She turned to point a shaking finger at Mr. Harrison. He harassed me. He came to my door at night, pounding on it, scaring my kids. He called me names. He's a monster, Your Honor. How can you let a monster throw a sick woman and 3 babies onto the street in the middle of winter? Her voice rose to a crescendo, ending in a sob that sounded more like a shriek. She buried her face in her hands again, her shoulders heaving. I let the silence stretch. I let her sobs echo in the room until they started to feel awkward, until the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Then, slowly, I turned my gaze to Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice low and even. Is this true? Did you harass this woman? Did you pound on her door and terrorize her children? Mr. Harrison looked up, his eyes wide with horror. He shook his head vigorously, his hands wringing the brim of his hat. No, Judge, no, sir, I would never. I only went there once, 2 months ago, to ask if she had any update on the rent. She wouldn't open the door. She screamed at me through the window that she was calling the police. I left immediately. Since then, I've only communicated through my lawyer. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling. Judge, I'm 72 years old. This rental property, it's my retirement. It's everything I have. I still owe the bank. If I don't pay the mortgage by next month, they're going to take the house. Not just her home, but the investment I worked 50 years for. I've tried to help her. I gave her 3 months free when she said she lost her job. But then I saw the photos. Photos? I interrupted, raising an eyebrow. What photos, Mr. Harrison? Mr. Harrison fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. My granddaughter. She found them. On the internet. Instagram, I think it's called. He handed the envelope to the bailiff, who walked it up to my bench. I opened it slowly, sliding out the glossy prints. The first photo showed Sarah Jenkins, beaming at the camera, holding a glass of champagne. She was wearing a sparkling evening gown, standing in what looked like a high-end nightclub. The caption read, "Living my best life. Number birthday bash, number VIP, number no regrets." The date stamp was 3 weeks ago. The second photo showed her posing next to a brand new car, not the broken down vehicle she had just claimed to have. It was a shiny red convertible. Caption, "New wheels for the new me. Haters gonna hate. Number blessed." Date, last month. The third photo was the most damning of all. It was a picture of a lavish seafood dinner, lobster, oysters, expensive wine. The location tag was a 5-star restaurant downtown. The date, 2 days ago, the very same day she claimed she couldn't get out of bed to feed her children. I stared at the photos for a long moment. The sick mother, the broken victim, the woman who had just stood there and claimed the world was cruel to her while she drank champagne on Mr. Harrison's dime. I looked up. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My expression didn't change, but inside, the fire of indignation was fully stoked. "Miss Jenkins," I said, holding up the photo of the lobster dinner. "You mentioned chronic fatigue. You mentioned being bedridden. Is this the treatment plan prescribed by your doctor? Seafood towers and Chardonnay." Sarah froze. The handkerchief stopped moving. Her eyes darted from the photo to me, panic flickering behind the facade for the first time. That's old," she stammered, her voice losing its tragic timbre. "That's from years ago. He's lying. He photoshopped them." "Funny," I said, flipping the photo over to read the metadata printed on the back, "because the timestamp says 48 hours ago. And unless I'm mistaken, that restaurant in the background only opened last month." Are you a time traveler as well as a victim, Miss Jenkins? A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Sarah's face flushed a deep, angry red. The sorrow vanished, replaced instantly by a look of sheer venom. You don't understand, she snapped, dropping the fragile act entirely. I need self-care. Being a mother is hard. I deserve a break. Just because I'm poor doesn't mean I can't enjoy my life. You can enjoy your life, I shot back, my voice rising, thundering now. But you do not get to enjoy it at the expense of this man's livelihood. You do not get to eat lobster while he scrapes pennies together to pay the mortgage on the roof over your head. You claim poverty when it suits you, and you flaunt wealth when you think no one is watching. That is not survival, Miss Jenkins. That is theft. I slammed the photos down on the bench. And as for your medical condition, bailiff, hand me those doctor's notes she waved around earlier. The bailiff retrieved the crumpled papers from Sarah's reluctant hand. I smoothed them out. I read the first line, then the second. A cold smile touched my lips. Miss Jenkins, I said softly, did you really think I wouldn't check? This isn't a doctor's note. This is a printout from WebMD describing symptoms. And this one? This letter from Dr. Smith? It's written in Comic Sans font, with no letterhead, no medical license number, and a signature that looks suspiciously like your own handwriting. I looked her dead in the eye. You came into my courtroom, lied to my face, slandered this old man, and used your children as props for your con. You wanted a performance? You wanted an audience? Well, congratulations, you have one. And now you're going to hear the review. The moment the mask falls is always the ugliest part of the trial. When a manipulator realizes their tears have no value, they rarely retreat into shame. They attack. Sarah Jenkins didn't shrink away when I exposed her fraud. She exploded. The trembling, fragile mother vanished. In her place stood a woman consumed by narcissistic rage. She slammed her hands onto the podium, her expensive nails clicking against the wood. This is unfair, she screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. You're judging me because of how I look. You're judging me because I tried to find a little happiness in a miserable life. You have no right. I have tenant rights. You can't throw me out. It's winter. I have children. She grabbed her youngest child, pulling him close like a human shield. The boy looked terrified, not of me, but of his mother's sudden, violent shift in demeanor. Miss Jenkins, I said, my voice dropping to a register that rumbled through the microphone. Put the child down. Do not use him as a prop in your tantrum. And let me correct you on one thing. I am not judging you for seeking happiness. I am judging you for funding that happiness with money that belonged to Mr. Harrison. I am judging you for looking a man in the eye who showed you mercy and spitting in his face while you ordered lobster. I leaned forward, clasping my hands. You speak of rights. What about his rights? The right to the property he worked 50 years to pay for? The right not to be swindled by a professional grifter posing as a victim? You have used up every ounce of goodwill this court and this landlord had to offer. I picked up my pen, hovering it over the judgment order. You claim the system is cruel. You're right, it can be. But today, the system works. It works for the man who played by the rules, not the woman who thought she was above them. Judgment is entered in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Harrison, I announced, my words echoing with finality. Possession of the property is granted immediately, not in 30 days, not in a week. Immediately, Sarah gasped, her jaw dropping. You can't. Where will we go? We have nowhere. You have a convertible, I said coldly, gesturing to the photo on my bench. And judging by your social media, you have plenty of friends in the VIP section of the club. I suggest you call them. Or perhaps you can sell those designer shoes to pay for a motel. But you will not spend another night under Mr. Harrison's roof. I turned to the bailiff. Officer, ensure that Miss Jenkins is escorted to the property to retrieve her essential items only. She has 24 hours to vacate completely. If she is still there at 9:01 a.m. tomorrow, she will be arrested for trespassing. Then, I looked at the crumpled fake doctor's note still sitting on my desk. And Miss Jenkins, regarding these forged documents, submitting falsified evidence to a court of law is a felony. It's called perjury and obstruction of justice. I am forwarding these to the district attorney's office. You didn't just lose your home today, you likely lost your freedom. I suggest you find a criminal defense attorney, and I suggest you pay them up front because they certainly won't take your word for it. Sarah stood there, frozen. The reality finally crashed down on her. The acting, the tears, the fake illness, the entitlement, it had all crumbled under the weight of the truth. She looked at the camera, then at me, realizing there was no script left to read. But, my kids, she whispered. A last-ditch effort. Your kids deserve better, I said, my tone softening just a fraction, only for the sake of the children. They deserve a mother who teaches them responsibility, not manipulation. Child Protective Services will be notified of this eviction and the pending criminal charges to ensure their safety. You prioritized your image over their stability. Now, you have to live with that. I banged the gavel. The sound was sharp, decisive, ending the scene. Case closed. Sarah was let out by the bailiff, still protesting, but her voice lacked the power it had when she walked in. The energy in the room shifted instantly. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was light. It was the feeling of a burden being lifted. I looked over at Mr. Harrison. He was weeping. Not the loud, theatrical weeping of Miss Jenkins, but the silent, shaking relief of a man who had been carrying the world on his shoulders and just had it removed. He looked up at me, unable to speak, and simply nodded. He put his hat back on, his dignity restored. As the courtroom cleared, I took a sip of my cold tea. It was bitter, just how I like it. People say justice is blind, but that's not true. Justice sees everything. It sees the fake tears, the forged notes, and the selfish hearts. And sometimes, the most satisfying part of this job isn't just upholding the law. It's watching the curtain fall on a bad actor. The theater was closed. Real life was back in session. You think the story ends when the gavel falls? In a perfect world, perhaps. In a perfect world, a judgment is a final period at the end of a sentence. But we don't live in a perfect world. We live in a world where ego doesn't just bruise, it retaliates. And for someone like Sarah Jenkins, the courtroom loss wasn't a wake-up call. It was a declaration of war. I left the courthouse that evening feeling a sense of resolution. I had stopped a con artist and saved an old man's livelihood, or so I thought. But the silence of justice is often just the deep breath before the scream. The trouble started less than 24 hours later. My clerk, Christina, walked into my chambers the next morning. She didn't have my tea. She had a tablet in her hand and a look of absolute disgust on her face. She placed the device on my desk without a word. On the screen was a live stream replay. It was Sarah Jenkins. She wasn't packing boxes. She wasn't looking for a new place to live. She was standing in the middle of Mr. Harrison's living room, holding her phone up high, broadcasting to thousands of followers. Look at this, she screamed into the camera, her eyes wild, makeup smeared artfully to look like she had been crying for hours. This is what the corrupt system does to a single mother. Judge Boyd, that tyrant. He kicked me out. He hates women. He hates children. Look at how we have to live. She spun the camera around. The apartment was a wreck. But it wasn't a wreck because of poverty. It was a wreck because of rage. I watched in horror as she took a bottle of red wine, probably the same expensive vintage from her celebratory photos, and splashed it across the cream-colored carpets. Oops, she laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. I guess I'm just too clumsy from all this stress. Maybe Mr. Harrison can use my security deposit to clean that up. Oh, wait, I never paid one. The comments section, on the side of the video, scrolled by at lightning speed. Some people were seeing through it, calling her out, but far too many were buying the performance. Stay strong, Queen. Start a GoFundMe. That judge should be fired. I turned off the tablet. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, simmering fury. This wasn't just non-compliance. This was malicious destruction of property. This was a criminal act broadcast for clout. Before I could even process what I had seen, my office phone rang. It was the bailiff, Officer Miller. He was at the property to enforce the lockout at 9 a.m. sharp. Judge, Miller's voice was tight. You need to know what we walked into. She's gone. But the house. Judge, it's bad. How bad? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She poured concrete down the toilets, Miller said, his voice flat with disbelief. She ripped the copper wiring out of the walls in the basement. She even took a hammer to the drywall in the kids' bedrooms. It looks like a war zone. Mr. Harrison is here. And Judge, I think he's going into shock. He's just sitting on the front steps staring at the door. He can't even bring himself to go inside. I closed my eyes, visualizing the old man. He had won the legal battle, but Sarah Jenkins had made sure he lost the war. She had destroyed the very asset he fought so hard to save. The repair cost would be tens of thousands of dollars, money he didn't have. Where is she? I asked Officer Miller. We don't know yet, Miller replied. She cleared out before we got here. Neighbors say she loaded everything into a rental truck at 4 a.m., but she left a message on the wall, spray paint, in the hallway. What does it say? Miller hesitated. It says, Boyd is a bully. Catch me if you can. I hung up the phone. The room felt incredibly small. This was no longer a civil matter. It was no longer about rent or leases. Sarah Jenkins had made a critical error. She mistook my courtroom for a reality TV show where the drama ends when the credits roll. She didn't realize that in the real legal system, actions have consequences that don't vanish when you log off Instagram. I pressed the intercom button. Christina, I said, my voice dangerously calm, get the district attorney on the line and tell them to prepare a warrant, not for eviction, for felony vandalism, criminal mischief in the first degree, and flight to avoid prosecution. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. Sarah thought she had the last laugh because she had an audience on the internet. She thought she could destroy a man's life and drive away into the sunset. She was about to learn the difference between social media influence and judicial reach. She wanted to be famous? Fine. I was about to make her the star of a criminal trial. Catch me if you can, she had written. Challenge accepted. Here is the English version of Part 5, written specifically for voice recording without timestamps. The narrative escalates from the destruction of the property to the consequences of her flight. Script, save the acting, Part 5. Criminals often make one fatal mistake. They believe they are the smartest person in the room. They mistake silence for ignorance and patience for weakness. Sarah Jenkins believed that by crossing a state line, she had outsmarted the law. She believed that her spray-painted message on the wall was a victory flag. She was wrong. In the days following the destruction of Mr. Harrison's home, my office became a war room. The district attorney didn't need much convincing. The photos of the concrete-filled plumbing and the smashed drywall were enough to turn stomachs, even in a department that had seen everything. Warrants were issued immediately. Felony criminal mischief, grand larceny for the stolen fixtures, and reckless endangerment. But issuing a warrant is one thing. Finding a fugitive is another. Or at least, it usually is. You see, Sarah had an addiction. It wasn't drugs or alcohol. It was attention. She couldn't breathe without an audience. And that narcissism became her tracking beacon. 3 days after she fled, Detective Miller walked into my chambers. He didn't look stressed. He looked amused. Judge, he said, placing a file on my desk. We found her. Or rather, she found herself. He pulled out a printed screenshot from Instagram. It was Sarah, wearing a white robe, holding a mimosa, with a pristine blue pool in the background. The caption read, New Beginnings, leaving the toxicity behind. Number healing journey, number resort life. She didn't tag the location, Miller explained. She thought she was being clever, but she forgot one thing, the monogram on the towel she's sitting on. I looked closer. Embroidered in gold thread on the towel was the logo of the Sapphire Springs Resort and Casino in a neighboring state. She's 2 hours away, I said, shaking my head, spending the money she claimed she didn't have on a spa weekend while Mr. Harrison is trying to figure out how to pay for a plumber. We've already contacted the local authorities, Miller said. They're picking her up now. I wasn't there for the arrest, but I saw the body cam footage later. It was a study in contrasts. The video showed 2 uniformed officers approaching her by the pool. She was in the middle of a live stream, talking to her phone, preaching to her followers about how she was a survivor. When the officers blocked her light, she looked up, annoyed. Excuse me? I'm filming content here. Sarah Jenkins, the officer asked. Who's asking? She snapped, lowering her sunglasses. You're under arrest for felony criminal mischief and grand larceny out of Rhode Island. Stand up and place your hands behind your back." The phone dropped. The stream ended abruptly, but not before capturing the look of genuine terror that finally broke through her arrogance. There was no script for this. There was no poor mother act that could stop handcuffs from clicking shut. She tried to scream. She tried to yell that she was being harassed, that she was famous, that they couldn't touch her. But the law is indifferent to follower counts. She was marched out of the resort, past the stunned guests in her robe and slippers. The high-end fantasy she had crafted crashed into the gritty reality of the back seat of a patrol car. The extradition process was swift. She waived her right to a hearing, mostly because she couldn't afford a lawyer in that state. Her money, Mr. Harrison's money, had been drained on the convertible, the lobster dinners, and the resort suite. She was transported back to my jurisdiction in a prisoner transport van. No more convertible, no more leather seats, just cold metal and wire mesh. When she arrived back at the county jail, the booking photo told the whole story. The makeup was gone. The hair was messy. The defiant sneer had been replaced by a hollow, sullen stare. It was the face of someone who had realized, too late, that actions have echoes. The next morning, she was on my docket again. But this wasn't landlord-tenant court anymore. This was criminal arraignment. The stakes weren't just a house. They were years in a state penitentiary. I sat on the bench, waiting for her name to be called. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread. The community knew what she had done to Mr. Harrison. They had seen the pictures of the destroyed house on the news. There was no sympathy in the gallery today. There was only a collective demand for accountability. The side door opened. Sarah was let in. She wasn't wearing her designer coat or her expensive sneakers. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit issued by the Department of Corrections. Her hands were cuffed to her waist. She walked to the defendant's table and kept her head down. She refused to look at the camera. She refused to look at the gallery. And she refused to look at me. Her public defender stood up. "Your Honor, we are ready to proceed on the matter of the People versus Jenkins." I looked at her, really looked at her. The actress had left the building. The criminal defendant had arrived. "Miss Jenkins," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "you left a message on the wall for me. Catch me if you can. Well, we caught you. And now, you have my full attention." She flinched. She finally looked up, and for the first time, I saw fear. Real fear. Not the performed anxiety of the eviction hearing, but the primal dread of a trapped animal. "The charges against you are severe," I continued. "You didn't just walk away from a debt. You maliciously destroyed a man's life's work on your way out. You mocked the court, you mocked the law, and you mocked the victim. Today, we start balancing the scales." I turned to the prosecutor. "What is the state's position on bail?" The prosecutor stood up, a young woman with a sharp demeanor. "Your Honor, the defendant is a flight risk. She has already fled the jurisdiction once. She has no ties to the community other than the wreckage she left behind, and she has demonstrated a complete lack of remorse. The state requests bail be set at $50,000 cash." Sarah gasped. "50,000? I don't have that. I have nothing." "You had enough for a convertible," I interjected. "You had enough for the Sapphire Springs Resort. It seems your funds are only available when they serve your vanity, Miss Jenkins." I looked down at her. "Bail is not punishment. It is to ensure your return to court. Given your history of fleeing, your contempt for this court, and the message you left on the wall, I am inclined to agree with the state." I banged the gavel. "Bail is set at $50,000 cash or surety. If you cannot post it, you will be remanded to the Adult Correctional Institute until your trial. Officer, take her into custody." As the bailiff moved to take her arm, she didn't scream this time. She didn't fight. She slumped. The reality of the cage was settling in, but as she was being led away, she stopped. She turned back to me. I just wanted to be seen," she whispered, her voice trembling. I looked at her, my face unmoving. "You are seen, Miss Jenkins. For the first time, we see exactly who you are. They say prison changes you. I don't know if that's always true. I think for some, it changes them. For others, it just reveals them. When you strip away the filters, the followers, and the luxury goods, what is left? It took 4 months for Sarah Jenkins to face her final judgment. Because she couldn't post the $50,000 bail, she spent those months in the county jail. The Sarah that walked into my courtroom for sentencing wasn't the defiant woman at the resort or the weeping victim at the eviction hearing. She looked smaller, grayer. The roots of her hair had grown out, showing the natural color beneath the expensive dye job. She looked like a ghost of the persona she had created. She had pleaded guilty. Her lawyer was smart enough to know that with the video evidence, the spray-painted message, and the live stream of her arrest, a trial would only embarrass her further. She pleaded guilty to felony criminal mischief in the first degree and grand larceny. Today wasn't about guilt or innocence. Today was about the price tag. The courtroom was silent as Mr. Harrison approached the podium to give his victim impact statement. He walked slowly, leaning heavily on a cane he hadn't needed 4 months ago. Stress ages you faster than time ever could. He adjusted the microphone, his hands shaking slightly. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked at me. Judge Boyd, he began, his voice raspy. I worked for 50 years. I was a janitor. I cleaned other people's messes so I could buy that building. It was supposed to be my safety net. When I saw what she did, the concrete in the pipes, the holes in the walls, he paused, taking a ragged breath. It wasn't just the money, it was the malice. She didn't destroy my house because she was desperate. She destroyed it because she wanted to hurt me. She wanted to punish me for asking for what was mine. I lost my savings, fixing what she broke. I'm starting over at 72 years old. And the hardest part is, I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again to live in that home. He stepped back, wiping a single tear from his cheek. He didn't scream. He didn't curse. He just laid his broken trust on the table for everyone to see. It was Sarah's turn to speak. Her lawyer nudged her. She stood up. This was the moment where most defendants beg for mercy. This was the moment for the I'm sorry speech. Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. I made a mistake. I let my emotions get the best of me. I was stressed. I just want to go home to my kids. Please, don't send me away. I'll pay him back. I promise. Just let me work. Let me go. I listened carefully. I listened not just to the words, but to the silence between them. I heard I made a mistake. I heard I was stressed. I heard I want to go home. What I didn't hear was an apology to Mr. Harrison. Even now, facing prison, she was the protagonist of her own story. Mr. Harrison was just a plot device that got in her way. I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the bench. The air in the room grew heavy. Miss Jenkins, I said, I have listened to your plea, and I have listened to Mr. Harrison. You stood there and asked for mercy because you were stressed. You called the destruction of this man's life a mistake. Spilling coffee is a mistake. Pouring quick-drying concrete into a plumbing system is a calculated act of war. I picked up the probation report. You say you will pay him back? How? You have no job? You have no assets? The only money you had, you spent on a convertible and a spa weekend while you were fleeing the law. Your promises are as empty as the walls you tore down. I looked her in the eye. You used social media to weaponize public opinion against a man who helped you. You tried to destroy his reputation to save your own ego. You treated life like a game where you could rewrite the rules if you cried loud enough. But the game is over. In this court, I continued, my voice hardening, we do not reward performance. We punish reality. And the reality is that you are a danger. Not physically, perhaps, but financially and emotionally. You are a predator who poses as prey. Sarah Jenkins, for the charge of grand larceny and criminal mischief in the first degree, I am sentencing you to a term of 3 to 5 years in the state penitentiary. A gasp went up from the gallery. Sarah's knees buckled. Her lawyer had to grab her arm to keep her upright. 3 years? She shrieked. For a house? It's just a house. It is not just a house, I roared back, silencing the room. It is a man's life. It is his past and his future. And you stole it because you felt entitled to it. You will also be required to pay full restitution in the amount of $48,000. A judgment will be entered against any future earnings you may have. You will not see a dime of your own money until Mr. Harrison is made whole. I turned to the bailiff. The defendant is remanded to the custody of the Department of Corrections to begin her sentence immediately. As the officers moved in, the reality finally hit her. There was no phone to record this. There was no filter to make the orange jumpsuit look chic. There was just the cold click of the handcuffs and the long walk to the holding cell. She looked back at me one last time, desperation in her eyes. "Judge, please. My kids. Your children are with their grandmother," I said calmly. "They are safe, and for the first time in a long time, they are away from the chaos you created. Use these 3 years to become the mother they actually deserve, not the one you pretend to be on Instagram." I watched her disappear through the side door. The heavy steel door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in the quiet room. Mr. Harrison looked up at me. He didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed. The tension that had held him hostage for 6 months finally let go. He nodded, a gesture of profound gratitude. I nodded back. The docket was cleared. The show was over. But as I gathered my papers, I knew the story wasn't quite finished. Because justice isn't just about the punishment. It's about what happens after the debris is cleared away. Time moves differently inside a cell than it does on the outside. For Sarah Jenkins, 3 years was 1,000 days of gray walls and rigid schedules. But outside, in the world she tried to manipulate, life didn't pause. It flourished. You see, the thing about public outrage is that it burns hot and fast. But community spirit, that burns slow and warm. When the news of Sarah's sentencing broke, and the images of Mr. Harrison's destroyed home circulated, something remarkable happened. People didn't just leave comments. They showed up. A local plumbing union heard about the concrete in the pipes. They showed up with 3 vans and a crew of 10, working an entire weekend for free to replace the plumbing. A carpentry business donated the drywall. Neighbors who had never spoken to Mr. Harrison brought food, paint, and brushes. I didn't order that. The law didn't mandate it. That was the community balancing the scales on its own terms. 6 months after Sarah went to prison, Mr. Harrison sent a photo to my chambers. It wasn't a photo of him looking sad or defeated. It was a photo of him standing on the front porch of the rental property. The house was pristine, freshly painted, the garden weeded, the windows shining. Next to him stood a young couple, teachers, I believe holding a set of keys. He had rented it out again. He hadn't let the trauma of one bad actor destroy his faith in people. That, to me, is the definition of resilience. He reclaimed his asset, but more importantly, he reclaimed his peace. As for Sarah, 3 years later, her release date arrived. There were no cameras waiting at the gate. There was no welcome home party. The internet, which she had worshipped like a god, had long since moved on to the next scandal. Her Instagram account had been deactivated, her followers scattered to the winds. She walked out of the facility with a plastic bag of belongings and a bus ticket. She wasn't the influencer anymore. She was a convicted felon with a massive debt hanging over her head. The terms of her probation were strict. She had to work, real work, and a percentage of every single paycheck would be automatically garnished to pay back Mr. Harrison. I heard through her probation officer that she found a job, not as a model, not as a lifestyle guru. She was working the night shift stocking shelves at a warehouse. It was hard, physical labor. No audience, no applause. Just the quiet, repetitive work of earning a living. One afternoon, about 6 months after her release, a small envelope landed on my desk. It wasn't addressed to me directly, but it was copied to the court for the restitution file. It was a check, made out to Mr. Harrison, for $200. It was a drop in the ocean compared to the $48,000 she owed. It would take her decades to pay it all off. But that wasn't the point. Attached to the check was a note. No emojis, no hashtags, just handwriting that looked a little shaky. It read, "Mr. Harrison, I know this doesn't fix what I broke, but I earned this money. I didn't steal it. I didn't beg for it. I worked for it. I'm sorry." I stared at that note for a long time. It was the first honest thing Sarah Jenkins had produced in years. Prison hadn't given her a new personality. It stripped away the fake one. It forced her to find value in the one thing she had despised: effort. She was no longer living for the likes. She was living for the rent, for the groceries, and for the debt she created. Some might call that a tragedy, a fall from grace. I call it a correction. Mr. Harrison got his house back. Sarah got her reality check. And the system, flawed as it is, managed to steer a chaotic situation back toward order. The last I heard, Sarah was still working at that warehouse. She was tired. Her hands were calloused. She drove a used sedan, not a convertible. But she had her children back on weekends. And when she took them to the park, she didn't take photos. She just watched them play. She learned the hardest lesson of all. A life that looks good is cheap. A life that is good costs work. And that, finally, is a verdict we can all live with. I closed the file on Harrison versus Jenkins a long time ago. It sits in the archives now, just another case number among thousands. But the lesson of that case remains on my bench every single day. We live in an era where everyone is performing. We filter our faces, we edit our lives, and we curate our struggles for maximum sympathy. We have convinced ourselves that if we cry loud enough, or if we get enough likes, reality will bend to our will. Sarah Jenkins believed that. She believed that her narrative was more important than the truth. But the courtroom is the one place left where the filter comes off. The law doesn't care about your follower count. It doesn't care about your brand. It cares about facts. It cares about contracts. And it cares about the quiet, invisible rights of people like Mr. Harrison, people who play by the rules and expect the system to protect them. When I looked at Sarah, I didn't see a monster. I saw a tragedy of modern entitlement. She was a woman so addicted to the image of victimhood that she created actual victims to sustain it. She was willing to destroy an old man's retirement just to keep up appearances. Sending her to prison wasn't about cruelty. It was about clarity. Sometimes, the only way to save a person from their own delusion is to force them to hit rock bottom. The concrete floor of a cell is a hard place to sleep, but it is also a very real place. There are no likes there. There is no applause. There is only you and your choices. And Mr. Harrison? He reminds us of something we often forget. Dignity isn't loud. Resilience doesn't post a selfie. True strength is cleaning up the mess someone else made and finding the courage to open your door again. He is the hero of this story, not because he fought a dragon, but because he survived a parasite and kept his humanity intact. So, the next time you see a viral video of someone screaming about injustice or someone weeping without tears for a camera, ask yourself, what is happening off screen? Who is paying the price for that performance? And if you ever find yourself in a courtroom, whether it's mine or someone else's, remember this advice. Leave the acting at the door. We have seen it all. We know the difference between a breaking heart and a calculated script. Respect the law, respect your neighbors, and above all, respect the truth. Because if you try to fake it, you might find that the only thing you lose isn't just your case, it's your freedom. My name is Judge Boyd. This case is closed, and this court is adjourned.